Thank you, George, and thank you, BK, for that interesting insight into Unreal Engine, and in particular Avalanche, which is going to dovetail with the user-friendly design tools to take motion graphics to the next level. Now, all this talk of Unreal Engine leads us rather nicely into our next segment. We're going to talk in detail about virtual sets, virtual studios, and augmented reality, both within studios and sets, and on location on outside broadcasts. This is going to be called Back to the Future, Best Practice for Virtual Production in Sports Broadcasting. Joining me today to discuss that subject is Alex Dinnin. He's Warner Brothers Discovery Director of Graphics and Innovation. John Murphy, BBC Sport Creative Director for Motion. Mike Watts, who's Lead Director for Premier League Productions. And of course, that's the partnership between the Premier League and IMG to produce and distribute the Premier League's international programming. And Sky Sports Senior Technical Specialist for OB Graphics and Data, Rebecca Page. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to kick off the conversation with a few whys and whens. We appreciate that the technology has improved now, so that virtual technology is better than it was in previous years. But what does that mean as far as why we should use it and when? Alex, we're going to come to you first. Eurosport and Warner Brothers Discovery famously introduced the Cube. Why was that development put in place?
It started off as a bit of a science project in Pyeongchang with White Light and Eurosport. I wasn't really involved in it then, I was elsewhere. But then I was brought in 2 or 3 years ago to come and work on it for Tokyo. It was going to be taken to Tokyo. We were going to ship it around the world to all the Grand Slams. And obviously, COVID struck. And it was very much parked. But we desperately needed a studio. We didn't actually have one locally. We needed something that could be COVID friendly, and so it was placed in White Light's production room. Really, we used their meeting room as a gallery, and we did the first US Open from White Light.
So it's necessity more than anything else.
It was definitely a necessity. Yeah, we needed a studio. We were told by the US Open that we could, that it was going ahead during COVID, but obviously without fans. But no broadcasters were allowed to be there. So it was a crazy time there. There was one cameraman operating a jib. I think we had one presenter. I think we had Babsy was the only presenter, and so they were socially distancing. And then we had very few people in a gallery in their meeting room. It was,
John, on that same sort of subject, the BBC adopted virtual technology for the most recent Olympics, both winter and summer. Was there a particular reason behind those two deployments?
So as Alex says there, really, Tokyo was ironically for Tokyo, we were going to be going to, before COVID, we were going to go to Tokyo and do a green screen in Tokyo. The reason being for that was purely that we didn't have a backdrop that we were happy with. There was in the terms of locations and what we were being offered. So the idea was obviously to have, because obviously the benefit of being there is the access to the athletes and editorially. So we were going to do all that. Obviously, COVID hit. We came back to, we went to Salford, stayed in Salford, sorry. We've obviously got our football studios there we've been working with in Dock 10 now so although we went into a different studio, obviously the infrastructure in Dock 10 and everything else, we're comfortable with. We set up a green screen there and did effectively just what we were going to do in Tokyo. So that was for that reason. The Winter Olympics, again, slightly different. We utilised our smaller green screen studio in our building, BBC building, which is 84 metres squared, small box really. But what we did, we just kind of gave it we thought on the back of Tokyo, we couldn't then kind of, do something. We wanted to do something good again, and we just kind of created a winter, ski resort effectively. And the beauty of the Winter Olympics is, and the Summer Games, is that you're on VTs a lot of the time, and so obviously we were able to create 6-7 different positions. But that's primarily for the two Olympics. They were the cases really.
Thanks very much. Now, Mike, you're at PLP at Premier League Productions. You've gone virtual a lot more, say a lot more recently, shall we? So, what's the origin for the studio set that you're using now for your international output?
So we didn't go virtual until start of this season, and I think our experience and the reason we went down the virtual route is very different to what you've heard, I guess, from Alex in particular. So ours was definitely out of choice. The challenge we've got at PLP, we have 8 different studio shows ranging from live match coverage to like an LE type football show. So going back last year, we had a hard set, and how do you try and create different looks for all these different shows? So our feeling really was that we wanted to go down the virtual route to try and ensure that all these shows had their own look and feel. I think for us as well, we definitely benefited from waiting. So Alex, I guess, and John did the hard work, and we just waited. And once everything was sort of set up and working really smoothly, we came in, which has been a huge help to us. I guess the other reason, so really it's to make sure every shows have variety, different looks, different feels, try and give the viewers the best content you possibly can. The other thing long term for us is it's really trying to future proof. I think looking at where the industry's going and what we started to see from other broadcasters and what's achievable for us, I guess, as the broader IMG, not to have a virtual green screen space almost seem criminal now in the modern age. So those were the 2 main drivers really for us.
Thanks very much. Let's just touch on a few things that relate to all those 3 answers there. Let's go with cost to start with. In any of these examples, I'll go, John, we'll come to you. Is this a cheaper option? There is a myth that this might be a cheaper option. Would you say that's is a myth, or is there any truth in it?
It's a myth. I would say, I mean, look, I think it's, although I haven't said that on a serious note, I think the initial costs, obviously, you know, the for the creative and getting the green screen right, the technology, you know, you obviously, there's a kind of a big upfront cost. I suppose where the business case comes in is when you have your own studio, and then what you've got is you've got something that's already set up. You're able to kind of and then you're able to just, you know, be creative with it going forward, which obviously is great. It's great editorially as well as kind of for the production. So I would say, I think as a one-off event, you can still be spending a lot of money, but I think the benefits are in the business case scenario when you have your own studio and you're doing on a more longer term basis, and you know you're putting different programming. Our Pres 2 in Key House at the moment, you know, that's been a really good business case for us because effectively, I know we did the Winter Olympics from there, but you know we're creating output daily, effectively stuff for the iPlayer, other events, Olympic sports events, and you know, so that's been a big win for us.
Alex, and Mike, have any part of this cost conversation? Have you got anything to add to that before we move on?
Well, I'd only say that I think you're right. I think the original outlay is obviously expensive, but you know, I'd question, John, whether, you know, to build your studio for real, your Beijing studio might have been a bit more costly than a green screen studio.
Yeah, true, very true.
I think, but you're right, absolutely. The outlay is obviously, you know, is obviously key. But once you've done that, you know, whilst you know the 3D environments, you know, are relatively expensive, there you can go much bigger and better now, I think.
Yeah, I think as well with the initial outlay is huge. Well, not huge, that's not fair, but the initial outlay is larger than a traditional reel set, as it were. But for us, for example, we had our previous hard set for 6 years, and it was a brilliant design studio which had lots of variety, and it was a 360 studio, so you could shoot every different angle. But ultimately, if you want to give the viewer the best experience, we really wouldn't have wanted to have a hard set for 6 years. It's hard to keep that going. Whereas this technology and what we've enabled here, there's no reason why we don't have our look for the virtual studio for 2 seasons, and actually then the cost of doing a complete redesign compared to another hard set and the technology you'd need to install for that is actually a lot cheaper. So I think if you're looking at a project, which we've been fortunate enough in this case, and our hope would be that we've got a long-standing relationship with the Premier League that will continue to grow. There's no reason why we're not still in that studio in hopefully 10 years' time. Therefore, by having this technology, we can have so many different looks and different studios within that time, which we wouldn't been able to afford or achieve if it was traditional hard sets.
Thank you. You said something very interesting there, Mike. You said about viewer experience. Now, I'm going to throw something at you here, which I'm sure is going to be slightly controversial. Editorially, how popular are you three guys with your creative teams when it comes to where you should be doing presentation?
Everyone hates me. Certainly the production team hate me. It's really hard, and I come from that background. I come from being on site all the time, looking after studios on site, and now we're over at Long Walk Studios by Heathrow, doing the Australian Open, getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, arriving on site at 3 o'clock in the morning to work 12 hours by Heathrow Airport is not a lot of fun in the middle of January when you could be in Melbourne.
John, are you equally as unpopular?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm unpopular to myself really because I love going on location. Missed a lot of great trips. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, no. So I think, look, I think editorially, it's important to note that I don't think anyone is saying that if you've got a big event in stadium and getting that atmosphere and being you don't replicate that, and that's still really valid. I think probably where it softened the blow on us a little bit, obviously I think with COVID, the whole remote production workflow in total, obviously has changed the game now also about being on location. So it's not just the virtual studio. So that's possibly softened the blow for us as well, I would say.
Thanks very much, Mike. I don't want to leave you out. People hate you as well?
I'm probably not quite as unpopular as John and Alex, in the sense that we concentrate on Premier League coverage. So we've got 380 games. So we're not going to be ever able to go to all 380. I think for us, it's this season in particular, we maybe haven't gone on site and done as many productions as we'd like to do. Our senior producer is also one of my best friends. He constantly does hate me, in fairness, because he's blaming this for not going on site. But I think it's for us, it's maybe slightly different. So we were never always on site for games. I think the hope for us next season would be it's a much more of a combination of the two, trying to get that experience of, like John said, you can't replicate it. I'm sure if you look at what both BBC and ITV did for the World Cup this year, they could be on site, so took advantage of being on site. When those opportunities are available to us, I'm sure we'll do the same and try and blend that in with the virtual studio stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Rebecca's been with us and hasn't had a chance to input. Now, I'm just going to bring you in now. We talked about virtual sets. Now, I appreciate your experience is very much on the AR side of things. Now, we have AR within studios, but from your perspective on a sort of general level, Rebecca, when should we be using augmented reality and when perhaps shouldn't we use it?
Well, you can't really do without the studio, can you? But the AR is always an add-on. So I think for me, what I find important is that the director and producer are really on board with the use of it as well, because you can spend all the time and the people, resources. It takes a lot of work to get these AR elements working. And then if they're on screen for 3 seconds, it's not adding any value to the broadcast. So you've really got to make sure that everyone's on board and everyone's encouraged and enjoys using it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We'll come back to some of that in a bit, actually. Let's talk about design. Let's talk about the fundamentals of virtual production design. Alex, what's important when it comes to designing virtual spaces?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think, obviously, functionality, aesthetics are key. What I discovered, just from experience, when we first did when we built the first 3D studio for the US Open, I mean, it was a bit of a rush job anyway, but we just made one room. And when we were working through that, we were then building the studio for Tokyo. It was also one room. And when we were testing it, it felt it didn't have any depth. It was just, it was a studio looking out onto Tokyo, and we thought, well, let's put a balcony out there. Let's make it a bit bigger. Let's make the the building a bit taller. And then all of a sudden, you're like, well, actually, can we go and stand on that balcony? And then all of a sudden, it was just like it clicked. Well, actually, the most important thing I think about designing virtual studio is space. Is you can, instead of everything like it was in a built set, you have to stand here and do everything in one place. You can go all over. You can have a seated area But if you want to then do a VT, quickly whip the seats out, put and people are standing, and then you're standing in a different part of the studio. This was really key, certainly for me. And secondly, with design, I think something that I really need to work on was the singles, for the close-ups of the presenters and things like that. Concentrate on those as well. I know the BBC did that really, really well. I was watching their Beijing coverage. Yeah, I thought they really, really thought about their singles, and I hadn't so much. And it was a real note to self. So, and that's a bit of a hat tip, Murphy, as well.
Come on then, John Murphy. What did you do? Come on.
Oh no! I mean, to be honest, design is. I mean, that's the biggest. It's the biggest thing, isn't it? I think. I think now we've got the tools are there with the whole kind of gaming engine and the realistic kind of rendering. It's fantastic, but at the end of the day, it's still got to be really good. You've got to get good designers involved, and things like I just say that Alex. Even people with the broadcast experience, so thinking about singles and that, you can obviously you can bring gaming engine artists in and everything else, and they can get all the rendering done. But in terms of actually getting the kind of the broadcast shots and what you need to have in the backdrops and everything else, that needs to have the knowledge, of what we do and how we use our cameras. So I think, without good design, and I think that goes back a little bit to my point before about, the whole thing about the cost and everything is that, yes, you can do it. You can do it cheaply. You could probably do it, cheaply, but it probably won't look as good because you've obviously got to put really good design effort in. I think the one big thing also is the fact that the problem you do have with virtual a little bit is that you can carry on and carry on and carry on, and sometimes you've got to actually say it's done, it's stopped. You can tweak things. Design for me. Design is the main part of it. Good design.
I'm going to make an interesting observation here. Virtual space is unlimited. That's an obvious thing to say. Is that a benefit or is that a challenge, John?
Do you mean in terms of the actual what you can do? Yes. It's both really, I would say. So obviously the benefits are, again, Beijing for us, an 84-meter square box, and we created a winter ski resort. That's fantastic. However, it is a bit of a blank canvas. As I say, you can go on and on with it. I think you've got to be quite structured in what you want. Otherwise, the project can roll on. But yeah, I think it's both. I think it's something that you kind of it's really exciting. It's really great to be a creative in that area, but you've also got to have the kind of the production head on as well, just to be able to sort of say, right, okay, we've created a great space, but now it's time to kind of just get into the nuts and bolts of it.
So practicalities are important. So, Mike, as a director, do you then therefore have to rein yourself in to maybe restrict the number of camera moves that you're able to do?
Possibly. I think when you talk about space as well, one thing that's always key to remember is your floor space is always your floor space. So I think with the design in particular, it's quite easy to get carried away if you create this huge, vast, gigantic studio, but you can only walk a very tiny distance or only be in one place. It doesn't necessarily look right. So I think you've always got to consider that with the design. I mean, in our case, in our set, in our virtual studio, so we've called it Premier League Studios. We've got 7 different presenting areas and 3 different stud areas, which you think would be enough. But obviously, we get in with producers, we get excited as directors, and all of a sudden, we're in a set which is a bit more close and intimate. It's like, well, can I go and stand over there? Can I do this and do that? And the truth of the matter is, yes, you can, but it hasn't necessarily been designed for that look. So, we got lucky on a couple. So I guess, like to Alex's point, we had a balcony in our social set, and we were just playing in rehearsals. And it was like, well, I can stand on the balcony. That's quite cool. But obviously you've got to remember the scales and everything when it's designed aren't necessarily designed for that area to be stood. So you can 100%, you can definitely get carried away in this. When something is endless in terms of the possibilities, is where do you draw the line on it? and that's also in terms of the look you're going for. So we've gone down the look of trying to make it a real, a real experience. We're still getting viewers thinking it's a real studios, but particularly if you're doing a different, I don't think it's necessarily right for us in Premier League football, but if you're doing another sport, another event, why not go, I'm going to embrace this being a complete computer space and don't have to try and make it look real. And if you get into that world, I don't know where you draw the line, because there's no end in what you could possibly.
All right, let's talk about realism. It's the elephant in the room. How do I ask this in a polite way? Do viewers really believe these sets are real, John Murphy?
I think this conversation's been had before, but I think there's two things to this. I think within the industry, I think we're all looking at the output, and I think within the industry, pretty much most people know when it's even as good as it might look, even as photorealistic, they know that it's not real. However, I mean, for example, Tokyo, we were quite surprised how many tweets were coming in saying we didn't think the BBC were in Tokyo. What the BBC did? I mean, the fact we were on this Japanese structure on top of a skyscraper in the with a Japanese garden and everything, and I'm quite but the viewers are. I think it's just a different way, isn't it? Because they're not looking at the detail; they're obviously watching the program, and so it's kind of the surroundings are, it's really important. Of course, it's really important, but they're not looking at it in that detailed way that we do, I think, in the industry, and that's probably. And that's the beauty. And also for us, it's it's not a case of we're not trying to say, we're never trying to say it's real. We're not trying to do that. But I think you've got to still make it look as good as you possibly can for the quality of the output. But then it's down to the viewers to make their minds up.
Alex, to the similar sort of question to you, but how do you then? If it matters that it looks real, even if we understand within the industry it's not, how do you make it look as realistic as possible?
I think, as you say, it needs to look as realistic. It has to look as real as possible. You can't, I'm still going back to that previous question. I look at it and think it never looks real. I can always see it's not real. But that's what you strive to succeed. That's why we keep working as well. I want to stand and go, actually, is that real? And I think it's when it goes back to design again. It has to look like it's been properly built. It has, and unless you do go down a completely crazy sort of virtual world, I'm currently still designing sports sets. And so in my head, I still have to design them so they look real, so that there has to be joins in the woodwork, and it has to feel like it's been constructed, and that is eventually why it looks real, but not in my head.
Mike, your output goes to a lot of different territories. Do you get different reactions to virtual graphics depending on who's seeing those?
I think unlike say the UK market, a lot of the territories we broadcast to haven't been able to go down the virtual route themselves. So I think for us, we found in particular at the start, it's the classic. It was as well as a huge team at PLP. This was my baby, right? So I was like, as soon as we go on air, you're going on Twitter and you're like, right, what they're saying it, and people are saying, and generally, particularly areas we were going to, people thought it was real. It's the classic. I think Dan Walker did one for you, John. It was the classic. As soon as one presenter goes in and starts showing its screen, and that starts going out there. So as soon as all our presenters start taking it, like, oh, this is magic. I'm like, well, that's ruined that one. So we can't try and pretend. But I still think, generally, I think it's improved dramatically. If I'm honest, I think the refinement of graphics is huge, as well as it's the design, it's the implementation. So I think for us, I'm sure Alex, you'll be the same. You come up with these beautiful designs, and then you can look at one thing on paper and think that'll look fantastic until it's actually implemented into the studio. You just never know. And we're still, and because we're not just like a short series, I guess, unlike the Olympics and the US Open as an example, we're still refining every day. So during the World Cup this year actually gave us a huge chance to get in there and try and make it, refine what we needed to. And I felt we came back actually after that month in particular, there was a huge difference in the quality of the texture of the flooring, the realism. And I think that's the other thing to never fit. Like, I think this process never ends, especially if you're sure you're the same, John, with Match of the Day. Something that's a series, you can just you'll never stop working on it. You just have to keep going, and there'll be a little improvement in technology, and it makes a huge difference to your production.
Thank you. Rebecca, from an augmented reality perspective, how important is realism, or is it not?
At Sky, realism is on a sort of scale with our augmented reality graphics. Like on the golf, for instance, they're more realistic, whereas on the cricket, they look more like computer game graphics, which is obviously done intentionally for like the younger audience of the 100. But I think we're not under the illusion that anybody thinks that these graphics are real. But I think it's still important that we make them sit in the real world as well as we can. So ways that we do that are, if we're outside, we'll look at the intensity of the sun and the direction of the shadow, and we can manually manipulate the shadow of the AR graphics to make it match with what's going on in the real world. We think about the perspective and the size. If we're using like players, for example, we try and make them as true to life size as possible, so that it doesn't look quite off when there's like a talent standing next to them. And also the eyeline of the talent, also stuff like that. So it's not real, but it kind of fits more seamlessly within the real world, so that it's less distracting to the audience.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Very useful insight. I'm going to skip on to a really stupid question now. I like to ask stupid questions. How important is testing? So who would like to take that as a ridiculous question? John, how important is it to test these things before you go live?
Very important. Yeah, I think that again comes back to probably when we were talking about the costs earlier. It's it just, you have to do more testing than you're on a traditional set. That's just, it's part and parcel of, not just for the talent, but obviously you've got all the things like the keying, the green screen, the lighting, obviously going back to the design, you've got all the different areas, so you've got different places to shoot and singles, and it just, it's and also design phase as well. You never go into a studio and you've done your first model block and it's right, everything's, oh great, we've done this. You have to, and what you see, I think that's the other thing for me as well, is that what you kind of see from the designers in terms, you have your kind of design sessions in terms of on just like, via Zoom or, actually in the Unreal model itself and doing streams and looking at things differently. But until you actually get in that studio on the actual broadcast cameras, you don't see the true output effectively. You can do as much design phase stuff as you want. It's really important. But until you get in the studio properly with the proper lighting and everything, that is when, it really kind of, it's where your decisions are made effectively. So that's where testing is. Yeah, you have to do a lot more testing than what you do in a traditional studio.
Mike, when it comes to the environment and talent, tell us about how talent interacts with the environment and how important it is to make sure that's worked through.
It's huge, and I think that's probably the one area in particular with Alex, who works with LEDs, compared to we're green screen. I think, John, you're green screen as well. So obviously, into what the talent sees in the green screen is really is imperative if we want to try and make it look real and make them feel as comfortable as possible. I think I guess I'll just say myself old here, that a traditional director, one thing it took a long time for me to get my head around was you just can mask so many things out in a virtual world. So I think it was all these ideas we had of we need this presenter to be able to talk to another presenter in a different location or someone on site. How do we do that in a virtual world that isn't just using projectors? I think we struggled on the projectors. We've got one on the green. But obviously, when you use projectors, the idea being is that you can show your talent effectively what they're going to see, but it's never going to do as much detail. It's fine for an outline. It's fine to get an idea. But we wanted, for example, to really have like detailed analysis runs and run it on the projection. And it's just not, you just can't get enough from it. So we've had to find other ways. But ultimately, as long as you haven't got any part of your set you need to show, you can put a real screen and you can mask it out. But we were fortunate when we came up with the project. We'd actually spoken to John at the BBC, and we spoke to ITV as well. And one thing we were sort of told is whatever you've got in for your testing period won't be enough. So, so we had a studio. We had to get rid of our old hard set in May, and we had to go live in August. So it was like you've got to strike a set, install a set, and obviously testing off site. And I think in the end, we probably had 4 weeks in the studio. And if you could have had double that, it still probably wouldn't have been enough for what you wanted. Similarly, it's problem with Premier League football. It's always the start of summer holidays. So everyone with kids in particular needs to go away on holiday. So we didn't really get enough time with our presenters as we would have loved. So we had to rein in a few of our sort of big ideas to a couple of weeks into the season. But I think as long as you've got to design it with them in mind, especially where the setup of the studios, where you put monitors, where they can see. Because ultimately, as much as it's easy for us behind the camera to think, oh, they'll be fine, if they're not comfortable and they can't see what they're doing, you've got no chance.
Now, while you were explaining that, Rebecca was chuckling to herself internally because she gets 20 minutes and no director to rehearse, and you had 4 weeks and loads of craft and crew. So, Rebecca, when you're doing an on-site OB, AR, graphic, let's say the avatars, for example, how do you test on the day? I mean, how do the rehearsals work, especially if the director's not even there?
Yeah, so we obviously try and do as much testing as we can beforehand and rehearsing before we go out. But there isn't a practice OB, is there? So there's not a lot of time, and as the director's got a lot going on. So for us, we find the best practice is to rehearse ourselves with the camera operator, the graphics operator, and make sure that we've got the technology working as well as it can and to the way we know the director expects it, and then present it to the director and talent so they can have a quick look, maybe a quick rehearsal if we're lucky, before it then goes straight out to air.
Excellent, thank you. Right, we've got 10 minutes to go. I'm going to rattle through some buzz topics, and we're going to start with Shimmers, Reflections and Shadows, which sounds like a really rubbish tribute band for a 1970s prog rock act. Who would like to start with Shimmers, Reflections and Shadows? Alex Dinnin.
Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
So it's the bane of my life. It's been everything I hate about LED studios. All the good things are great about LED studios, but shadows are completely washed out by the LED lights. I have tried everything to get shadows on my presenters. The moment we currently have a matte down, which gives contact shadows, and I will find a solution. I haven't found it yet.
Mike
or John, have you got a shadow solution?
Oh, I wish. Is the honest answer. I think to be honest, yeah. I think for me, it's still probably for virtual. Certainly in green screen, I'm basing this on now, but in green screen, I think it's probably the biggest giveaway. I still though. I think in terms of especially when you're walking to different areas. Obviously, if they're stationed, you can try and do little tricks. I mean, just by the way, because this process, you go through so many ridiculous things sometimes. I mean, I remember in the very early days in Doc 10 doing the football, and then all of a sudden somebody was standing in position. Somebody was saying, "Has anyone got any cling film to put on the floor?" Because it's kind of to get more. It's just It's just there's so many things to try and get it right, which I'm sure will come. And there's things like ray tracing and all of that. But at the end of the day, at the moment, or certainly when I've seen, I don't think the technology's there to actually to deliver the ray tracing on top of everything else in the broadcast bit. But I'm sure the clever guys will get something eventually, which gives us what we want.
Okay, avatars. Who works with avatars? Who's got anything to say about the best practice when it comes to avatars? Rebecca, maybe that's one for you.
Yeah, we do a fair bit with avatars, and I think what's really important for this is picking the right sports. So the main ones, we use them on our golf and cricket, and the reason for that is that the players, they have an individual way of playing that can be easily demonstrated through showing a virtual version of them to the audience. So you can really break down, like if it was a golf player, the way they swing, the way they stand, and those change person to person as well, which is quite important because it would be rather boring if it was just the same thing every time. So it really gives the chance for someone who has that expert knowledge to really be able to break apart and pick apart these individual playing styles of the players, so that, and the avatars are there to just illustrate it to the audience in a kind of 360 dimensional view.
Thank you. Avatars walk, so does talent. Mike, walking. How difficult is walking? Again, a ridiculous question, but you know what I'm saying, don't you? Talent walking in a studio. How do you overcome the difficulties of talent walking about?
I think, I guess going back to the previous one about reflections, that is, walking is the hardest trick. I think standing, yes, there's a huge, puts a lot on your performance of the machines and what you're trying to do. But I do think we're starting to get closer to reflections. Walking is always going to be that a bit harder. So I think in terms of design, it might be a case if you look at what your texture is going to be on the floor. I think that's a huge part. I think if you're designing something that is naturally going to reflect, it's a bit easier to achieve, as opposed to, we've got quite a lot of our flooring surfaces concrete in our design, so that can be a little bit harder. Alternatively, it doesn't create huge shadows anyway. I think the huge thing with walking is it just depends on your space. So we've got a 20 by 10 meter studio space, so we do have the ability to walk in between different parts of the set. However, I guess there's a real reason of why are you walking. What this technology has enabled us to do is we've created these, you've got 7 different presenting areas, 3 stood areas. Do you need to walk as well? What are you going to benefit from walking? So what we've tried to do with ours, we've only really got one area where you would deliberately walk. So there's you're either at a touch table or you're going to stand and do some analysis in front of a big screen. So there's sort of a reason to go between those 2 spaces. Otherwise, for all the other benefits you have with virtual, there's other ways to do it. You just might be sitting in a different presenting area or standing at a different part of the set. Try and avoid the walking if you can.
Cover it with VT.
That's definitely one solution. Right, as you interjected there, Alex, you've teleported talent into your virtual studios. What's the most important thing about your teleporting talent in?
Eyeline. If you look at our US Open, for the first teleportation we did, the eyeline is horrific. We spend hours. With the Australian Open, we have one of our someone who was working out there with us. We were trying to work out how we were going to interview I think it was 6'4" tennis player, and she was standing with a cone on her head so we could work out eyeline. I mean, basically, we've got monitors there, so when they're talking, that they're looking in the right direction, and we're making sure that it's all lined up. But yeah, eyeline's key. It's killer.
Thank you. Ordinarily, the word tracking would come up now, but I'm pretty sure John, Mike, and Alex have had no issues with that. However, I bet on an OB, tracking's an absolute nightmare, isn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, my camera doesn't sit in a studio with a tracking system attached to it all day. Every day the camera gets re-rigged. It needs to be recalibrated. It goes on a Steadicam as well, so it's got to have a full range of movements. So for this reason, we tend to use optical tracking for those kind of OBs. But that does have its downsides, because then we've got to be constantly operating the tracking system, because the sun going in and out, changing from day to night on these long hours. So it's a constant, not battle, but a constant observation process to make sure that we're getting the most out of the tracking as we can within the environment that we're in, which isn't always ideal.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, another buzz. Keying. Keying, is LED the answer? John or Alex? Who'd like to take that? Go on, Alex.
No, I'll start. I find it really interesting. I mean, obviously, I don't have any issue with keying at all. I have my own issues with LED. I have, my pixel width and things like that. I find it interesting that what bothers me about keying is it's such an old process. It's been going since the 60s, and has it been solved yet? I'm not
But
sure.
it's definitely better.
Oh yeah, it's definitely better than we were. But it's for what inherently is a fairly. I mean, it's a complicated process, but it's a fairly simple process. Why isn't it? Why hasn't it been solved properly yet? I mean, you guys, you must, you tackle it really, really well. But the inherent problems that comes with green screen, spill, everything, it's a nightmare. And I would have thought it should be solved by now.
Yeah, it's. I mean, as I say, look, it's. We wouldn't have gone virtual back with the football set probably when was it 5 years ago? I mean, until we started to see the real kind of jump in not just the gaming engine but in the keying as well from where it was. I mean, you're right. I think I say this many a time, but I talk about green screen all the time. I can't bear green screen to be honest. In terms of just because it's there's so many. It's great. Don't get me wrong, and you have to go through you have to go through the pain to do what you want to do. So that's fine, but it's not easy. It's not great, And you're right, Alex. Keying is not perfect, but it's all I can say is it's hugely better from when from
Yeah, so I did it. It's definitely better.
yeah.
It's not a simple process. As you say,
Yeah.
the pain you have to go through to get to that, the positioning, the lighting, everything, surely there must be a better way.
Now, that's an
I don't think.
Go on,
sorry,
Mike.
I just don't. I think now coming into the virtual world a bit later, that it's been when we were speaking to various different suppliers and seeing examples and testing. I just think it's not an issue to stop you going virtual, whereas it would have been back in the day. And I think it's definitely not perfect. And I think it's great that you've got LED and green screen, sort of the comparison between the two when we're talking, because there's definitely benefits to LED and there's definitely benefits to the green. But whichever way you go, I think the benefits and what you can possibly achieve creatively have now completely overtaken the difficulties you've got with it. And I don't have to deal with the problems. It's not my job to worry about keying, so I just sort of don't. But so I'm okay.
Passing the buck, throwing somebody else underneath the bus. Well done, Mike. Right, we've got 1 minute to go. We're going to have one last round. Very quickly, we're going to think about what happens next. Where does virtual technology or virtual production, virtual graphics, virtual sets, augmented reality go next? I'm going to start with John Murphy. Let's put on our Mystic Meg, Nostradamus, crystal ball, and where does this go next? Quick as you can.
Okay, very quickly, I will just say lose green screen, but not have to do the cost of LED.
Very nice. Rebecca?
I think that we've seen and loved the big, flashy, floating in the sky AR graphics, but I'd love to see a more subtle and clever use of them going forward.
Very nice. Mike, what's your prediction for the future?
I agree with John. I think LEDs are going to be the future, but it's not quite. In bigger studio spaces, it needs to come down in the cost for that to be achievable.
Brilliant. Alex, take us home.
God, I don't even know where to begin. I'm going to go back to where we started. I think Unreal. I think Unreal 6 in the future. It's going to make everything super realistic. I think that's going to be the beauty of it. I think let's get it hyper real.
Brilliant. That's a great way to end. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed that. I'm sure the viewers have too. John, Rebecca, Mike, Alex, thank you very much for your time.